It's Monday, August 3rd, 2020. I'm Guy McPherson, here with your daily dose of absurdity. That's GuyMcPherson.com or NatureBats Last if you're online. And if you're watching this, apparently you're online. The things I say, they're as absurd as the headlines. So 15 headlines today, the most ever in this series, dating back to last Friday after the markets closed. So there's a few of those fairly old headlines and then some new ones as well from this morning. First, from July 31st, last Friday after the markets closed, Universal cuts workforce as theme parks face major hurdles from pandemic. That's in the Orlando Sentinel, the local daily newspaper here. Also from last weekend after the close, from the Washington Post, for the jobless, uncertainty and sleepless nights as Congress lets the $600 a week unemployment benefit lapse, otherwise known as going away, because the money you paid into the system is not yours. Apparently, it belongs to Congress. From Bloomberg, markets can't stop thinking about Fed not thinking about hiking, as the Federal Reserve System is clearly not going to raise rates to strengthen the dollar. Instead, they're going to let the dollar continue to weaken, and that's what Bloomberg means by this headline. Markets can't stop thinking because they've never done this before. The markets, the Federal Reserve System has never gone this long while letting the dollar go into free fall without raising prime rates. From CNN Politics, $1.5 trillion of earlier relief still hasn't been spent. Here's what's left. So of the original $3.7 trillion set aside for relief, 1.5 trillion of it has not been released yet into the wild places like my bank account, for example, not to make too much of anything. From NBC News, Trump says he's banning TikTok in the US. And this is a couple of days old. This headline's been put out in many different media outlets, and this is yet another example of the growing rift between China and the United States, and the rift being accelerated by economic actions. From Business Insider, the stock market can drop as much as 80%. A 47-year market vet explains why we're in the midst of a global bust and makes a case for $10,000 gold. Again, as the dollar sinks, the US dollar sinks, gold increases in value. As the stock market sinks to the point of going away, to the point of capitulation, as it's almost done several times within the last decade, including most recently March 16th of this year, 2020, that causes the dollar to decline relative to other currencies and makes the case for gold and silver. You can't make the case strong enough for me to invest in something I can't eat, but other people have different preferences. From the Houston Chronicle, NRG mothballs carbon capture project at coal plant. Well, of course, it took NRG a while to figure out that you can't sequester carbon dioxide at sufficient scale to make it make any difference or to make any money. And that's the most important thing for NRG and every other corporation out there. Speaking of what matters, from The Hill, U.S. reports more than 25,000 COVID-19 deaths in July. So the month just completed has in the U.S. 25,000 deaths. So remind me again how it's a Chinese hoax. Remind me again how people going on air, online, like Judy Mikovits, the so-called doctor, claiming that it's no big deal, that it's the flu, that it happens every year. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. Show me a case of the conventional flu in which 25,000 people died in a month. Then I might take you seriously with your fake flu theory. From News4 Jacksonville, news4jax.com, that's a relatively local media outlet, Florida passes 7,000 deaths from coronavirus. Remind me again how this is just a Chinese hoax. remind me again that the flu is as bad as this and it comes every year. Or I prefer you not remind me of any of those things, because it just proves your total ignorance and stupidity. And I have enough of that coming to me via email. So please stay away with your crap. From RT, the $20 trillion threat that could trigger the next financial meltdown. I've been warning about this for 13 years or so. The great threat that could trigger a $20 trillion meltdown, and a lot worse than that, is called climate change. It's actually abrupt climate change, although RT and no other media outlet will admit as much, that we're in the midst of abrupt climate change, even though the peer-reviewed literature clearly indicates as much. So, $20 trillion, that's a minor concern compared to what's coming with respect to abrupt, irreversible climate change. From CBS News, U.S. sells record amount of corn to China despite rising tensions. I already mentioned the rising tensions and the threat that they pose, the rising tensions between China and the United States. And despite that, the Trump administration is willing to let go of the grains that keep civilization operating. This civilization, like all others, depends upon the ability to store food, and most notably grains such as corn, soybeans, and wheat. And here we are approaching the harvest season, which I suspect will be quite a bust this year, approaching the harvest season for corn and soybeans, and the United States sells a record amount of corn to China. This doesn't make any sense, and it sounds like it's really terrible news for the financial markets. From The Conversation, sent by my mate Kevin Hester a couple of days ago, energy is a basic need and many Americans are struggling to afford it in the COVID-19 recession. So, a basic need given how we live in cities, especially in overcrowded areas in the southern part of the United States. A necessity, if you're going to live under that set of arrangements, is relatively inexpensive energy. And the kind of energy that has gotten us through this far is fossil energy. Many Americans are struggling to afford it, and a lot of other things in the COVID-19 recession. From Bloomberg, Lord & Taylor, oldest U.S. department store, goes bankrupt. This is a department store that dates back many decades, and it's going bankrupt because people aren't shopping anymore. Why aren't people shopping? Because they don't have any money. Why don't they have any money? Because they aren't making any money, because their job went away. And there's no relief coming from Congress to give you your money back. Just another example of the desperate straits out there that many people find themselves in the United States. This from the Washington Post. $10 left, no place to go. That's terribly sad. This in the country that claims to be the richest country in the history of the world. Living on the street. The subhead for $10 left, no place to go. Pandemic and a broken unemployment system are upending people's lives. I would say destroying them, but that's just me. From CNN, coronavirus is still spreading uncontrolled, and one doctor says it's time for stricter measures. Well, that'll never happen, because the White House doctor who said that is Dr. Deborah Birx. And as part of the show, even though she presents this information, and it's undoubtedly viable, real, the coronavirus is definitely still spreading, and it's uncontrolled, and she gets that right. Are we going to do anything about it? It would very much surprise me. So there's 15 headlines of bad news. As you might expect, at 9:36 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, the stock markets are opening by exploding up. It's all green from here, folks, led by the NASDAQ at plus 110. And then the Dow Jones is up 130. The S&P 500 is up about 18 points. So let the absurdity continue. Let the circuses go on until the end of this version of civilization. Apparently, that's the goal. All civilizations require bread and circuses. We're getting rid of bread by selling off our grains to other countries, undoubtedly at a bargain price. But the circuses, you can count on those all the way to the end.